High noon on the frontier, and Rosalie Bennett stands at a crossroads, literally and figuratively. In one whirlwind move, she traveled thousands of miles to wed Henry Carlisle, only to discover that her too outspoken mind doesn't suit his rigid ways. In a tense standoff, cattle sickness threatens the entire region. Neighborly alliances are tested, and Rosalie finds herself deciding her own destiny in a land famous for opportunity, yet bound by tradition. Will she retreat or face down every expectation to teach Prairie Creek's children on her own terms? This gripping moment of conflict sets the stage for a story about self-discovery, resilience, and forging new beginnings amid the sweeping plains. Before we dive deeper, tell us where you're tuning in from, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories. Stick around till the end to see if Rosalie's bold heart triumphs over frontier prejudices and discover the choice that shocks the entire town. Rosalie Bennett clutched the smooth leather strap hanging from the stagecoach's ceiling, bracing herself as the wheels clattered over a series of potholes. She had endured nearly 3 days of grueling travel, crossing vast prairies and rugged passes. Each jolt reminded her she was leaving behind the old life in Boston, a life that had unraveled so abruptly and inching closer to what she hoped would be a better future. The advertisement in the matrimonial circular had seemed a godsend at first. Respected rancher seeks educated, bride of independent thought, age 25 to 35, followed by an address in a place called Prairie Creek. After reading Henry Carlisle's letters, Rosalie had felt an inexplicable spark, believing she might have found the one man who admired a forthright mind rather than shrinking from it. She had responded with optimism, omitting only the detail of why she'd been dismissed from her teaching post, not for negligence or incompetence, but for refusing to conform to outdated methods, and for speaking too plainly to the headmaster. Outside, the high plains of Wyoming Territory stretched under a vast sky, tinted by late afternoon light. Rosalie lifted the corner of the dusty curtain to peer at the final approach into Prairie Creek. It was a scattered settlement on the edge of rolling golden grasses, with a modest row of wooden buildings forming its main street. In her imagination, it had loomed larger, but in reality, it looked no bigger than a few hundred souls, perhaps just enough to keep shops and a small church afloat. She felt a surge of nerves. Was Henry Carlisle anything like his letters described? He'd painted such a picture of progressive thinking, praising her intelligence, her knowledge of literature, and her interest in modern teaching techniques. The comfort she'd derived from those letters still lingered, though her entire body ached with fatigue. A curt but polite voice from the coachman broke her reverie. Prairie Creek Stage Depot coming up, hold tight. The horses labored down the last slope into town, hooves kicking up dust that coated Rosalie's traveling skirt. She glanced at her reflection in a small hand mirror she kept in her reticule, smoothing stray wisps of auburn hair back into the pinned bun. Her parents' photograph tucked behind the mirror peeped at her, a reminder she was alone in this new chapter. Both mother and father lost to illness 2 winters before. She whispered a vow that she would not return to Boston beaten by circumstance. When the stagecoach finally rumbled to a halt, Rosalie found herself stepping onto Prairie Creek's main street. Her knees wobbled from the long confinement. Locals milled about, peering at the new arrivals with unabashed curiosity. Rosalie scanned the faces for someone matching Henry Carlisle's description, tall, broad-shouldered, and about a decade older than her, with neatly trimmed brown hair. A moment later, a man fitting that profile detached himself from the small crowd near the depot. He wore a dark suit and a polite, almost careful expression. He stepped forwards with the air of a man who commanded respect. "Miss Bennett," he said, tipping his hat. "Henry Carlisle. Welcome to Prairie Creek." His calm demeanor and refined accent matched the letters, and Rosalie's spirits lifted. Perhaps, after all, she'd found a place to build a life that wouldn't stifle her outspoken nature. Tucking her carpet bag under one arm, she allowed Henry to help her with the heavier trunk, though something in his level, assessing gaze gave her pause. She wondered fleetingly if there was a flicker of disapproval in that gaze, or if she was merely anxious from the journey. With a polite smile, she murmured, "A pleasure to finally meet you, Mr. Carlisle." Henry Carlisle led her across the dusty street to a modest restaurant tacked onto the side of Prairie Creek's single hotel. The wooden sidewalk creaked under their combined weight. Rosalie noticed how carefully he guided her, his manners impeccable, like a man used to controlling all aspects of a situation. Inside the establishment was humble but clean, with a scattering of small tables draped in checkered cloths. A young waitress greeted Henry by name, quickly seating them in the quietest corner. "You must be exhausted after your travels." Henry commented as he removed his hat, setting it neatly on a vacant chair. His voice held a polished edge that suggested Eastern schooling. I've arranged a room for you at the hotel tonight. We can discuss more over dinner. Rosalie murmured her thanks. She was indeed weary thirst parching her throat, but also curious. She wanted to see how Henry's in-person temperament matched the thoughtful, forward-minded tone in his letters. He offered her a glass of water, then addressed the waitress. 2 plates of the house special, please, before turning back to Rosalie with a measured smile. You did say in your letter you had no dietary restrictions. Yes, I did, Rosalie answered, returning his smile more tentatively. She noticed lines around Henry's eyes as though he often squinted under the Wyoming sun. Thank you for taking care of the arrangements. Everything happened so swiftly. Once we agreed I should come. Henry nodded. Wyoming can be harsh, and it's best to settle matters sooner rather than later. For instance, the ranch is a good 15 miles from here. It would be improper for you to remain there unwed for any length of time. Her heart lurched slightly. He spoke of impropriety with such casual finality, yet his letters had brimmed with admiration for her outspokenness. Rosalie forced herself to maintain an even tone, I see. Are you expecting that we proceed with a prompt ceremony then? She tried to phrase it gently, mindful that in Boston circles engagements often lasted months or more. Henry sipped water, a flicker of something discomfort crossing his features. I'd considered this coming Sunday. The local pastor is available. It would be direct and uncomplicated. He set down his glass. If you have concerns about speed, we can talk about it. But there's no reason to prolong matters if we're both in agreement. Rosalie braced herself, recalling the abruptness that cost her the teaching position. She'd been labeled too forthright. She swallowed her protest, replying calmly, I had hoped we might have a few weeks, or at least days, to acquaint ourselves in person. Letters can only convey so much, but I understand your perspective on propriety. A small line creased Henry's brow. Yes, well, it isn't just about me. Prairie Creek is a conservative community. People talk and reputations can be damaged unnecessarily. We want to avoid that for both our sakes. He coughed lightly, but I do appreciate your desire to get to know one another better. Rosalie studied him discreetly. The man she'd thought she'd known through written words exuded a more traditional stance than his letters had suggested. She recalled his references to women's suffrage as a compelling concept and how he'd applauded her in-depth knowledge of philosophy. Yet here in person, the conversation felt more about managing appearances than forging a partnership of equals. Could she have misread him, or had he withheld the truth of his attitudes just as she'd withheld certain details of her past? Their dinner arrived: roast beef, potatoes, carrots glistening in gravy. Hunger gnawed at her, but her appetite felt dulled by the tension coalescing between them. They spoke little during the meal. Henry asked superficial questions about her journey, her health, and whether she'd found the territory's scenery impressive. Rosalie responded politely, but her mind churned with doubt. Once or twice, Henry's eyes flicked up at her as if appraising the way she chewed, the way she dabbed her napkin. She forced herself to remain outwardly poised. At length, Henry leaned back, folding his napkin with precision. Miss Bennet, I confess you're younger than I'd pictured. You mentioned being 28, but perhaps my mind had conjured a woman more matronly. Nonetheless, you present yourself with confidence. Rosalie swallowed, not sure whether to accept that as compliment or mild criticism. I appreciate your directness, Mr. Carlyle, she said, inwardly hoping that directness could extend to real conversation about the values they once seemed to share. Shall we discuss your ranch? You described it in such detail in your letters, and I'm quite eager to see it in person. Henry nodded, though the tension in his jaw remained. Yes, tomorrow I'll take you out there for a brief look. We can speak more once you're settled at the hotel. He rose, signaling an end to the meal. Get some rest tonight, Miss Bennet. I'll handle the transport of your trunks. From the stage depot, we'll see where we stand come morning. Rosalie's first glimpse of Carlisle Ranch at sunrise should have been a moment of awe. The ranch sprawled across rolling plains dotted with grazing cattle and intersected by a modest creek. Beyond the fields, foothills rose dusted with early season snow that glimmered in the pale light. At the property's heart stood a large 2-story main house with a wraparound porch and sturdy barns off to one side. Ranch hands bustled about tending horses and preparing equipment. By most measures, it was an impressive operation, yet a current of unease marred Rosalie's appreciation. The carriage ride from Prairie Creek had been stifled by Henry's clipped silence. He'd answered her questions about the ranch's acreage and profits with brief, factual statements, but offered no warmth. No real sense of partnership. Instead, he suggested she remain in the carriage while he spoke with the foreman about tasks for the day, as if her presence required constant safeguarding. When they pulled up before the main house, a stout woman in her 50s stepped out onto the porch, her apron dusted with flour. Henry introduced her briskly. "Mrs. Turner, my housekeeper. She's readied the east bedroom for your stay until Sunday." Rosalie managed a polite smile. "Thank you for the welcome, Mrs. Turner. It's a lovely place." Mrs. Turner's gaze held curiosity and a trace of sympathy. "Mr. Carlyle, I've got bread rising, but I'll tend to Miss Bennet in a moment. Shall I have one of the stable boys bring her trunks in?" Henry nodded. "Yes, do that. I'll be inspecting the north pasture." With a nod to Rosalie, he said, "Settle in. We'll speak more at lunch." Then he strode away, leaving her standing in the dust with Mrs. Turner. The housekeeper's voice lowered, an apologetic warmth slipping through. "Come on in, dear. You must be tired from your travels." Leading Rosalie inside, she pointed out the parlor, the dining room with a long table, and at the end of the hall, a library containing shelves of books. Rosalie paused, recalling Henry's letters describing a grand library for shared intellectual pursuits. If those pursuits were real, where was that Henry now? Miss Turner led her up the wide staircase to a guest room. "I put fresh linens on the bed, dusted it thoroughly. Water for washing will be brought up soon. If you need anything else, ring the small bell by the dresser." Rosalie sank onto the bed, exhaustion creeping in, despite the day's youth. She stared at the pale yellow walls. She'd fantasized about decorating a homestead with her future husband, books arranged by topic spaces for children's lessons, perhaps a small garden. Now she felt no sense of belonging, only a swirling awareness that Henry's attitude was decidedly different than in his letters. After she changed from her travel-stained skirt into a simpler dress, she wandered downstairs. The library drew her like a magnet, rows of volumes, mostly agriculture, law, politics, and business ledgers. There were fewer literary works than she expected. She ran her fingers along the spines, reading titles about ranch management, economics of cattle, drives, mineral rights, and land disputes. A single shelf contained well-worn volumes of Shakespeare, a copy of Emerson's essays, and a battered edition of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. She extracted the Austen with a small, sad smile. Maybe Henry did have a pocket of more refined taste after all. Miss Bennet came, a voice from behind Mrs. Turner, again looking hesitant. Henry said, "Lunch might be around midday, but you're free to walk about until then. Just be mindful not to go too far from the house folks, new to the territory. Sometimes lose track of distances." Rosalie nodded her thanks, though she yearned to see more. Henry's aloofness weighed on her. Before her departure from Boston, she had envisioned a kindly intellectual rancher, eager to share new ideas with a bright-minded partner. But she was discovering he valued tradition and decorum more than the progressive ideals he'd hinted at. If a small difference in manner already chafed him, how would he react when he learned the reason for her dismissal from the Derby School, a clash over outdated classroom practices, and her refusal to remain silent? She drifted outside onto the porch. The crisp Wyoming air felt simultaneously invigorating and isolating. A trio of ranch hands passed by, glancing at her with polite curiosity. Rosalie offered a wave, noticing one man had a lively, inquisitive expression, but they continued on with no words exchanged. She sighed, turning her gaze to the horizon. In the distance, the rolling grasslands gave way to a gentle slope. She was reminded of the sense of freedom promised in Henry's letters. Women's suffrage had already taken root in Wyoming, he'd claimed, yet here she felt stifled and uncertain. Where was the open-minded partner who had so praised her intellect? Her hand went to the gold locket around her neck. Inside was the tiny photograph of her late parents. Her father's mild smile, her mother's firm but kind expression. She whispered to them in her head, "I thought I'd found a place that would value who I am. I hope I haven't made a terrible mistake." Part of her wanted to send word to Boston, see if she could salvage her old connections somehow. Another part insisted that turning back would only postpone facing reality. She had to see this through, at least for a little while longer. Lunch arrived at midday, proving to be an even more disquieting affair than the dinner of the previous evening. Henry returned from his tasks, ate with polite courtesy but minimal conversation. He asked about her comfort, yet bristled slightly when Rosalie ventured opinions about the ranch's potential for expansion. She sensed the tension building like a summer storm ready to break, and break. It did that very afternoon when Rosalie discovered the reason Henry truly valued female education, provided it didn't overshadow his authority. They were in the ranch's front parlor, Henry seated stiffly on a settee, Rosalie on an opposing chair. The question that changed everything arose from Henry's mention of a land rights dispute with his neighbor James Mackenzie. "I'm told Mackenzie employs radical methods," Henry had remarked, lips curving in a faint sneer. "Hires foreign workers, pays wages that disrupt the local scale. He's more trouble than good for Prairie Creek." Rosalie had seized on the mention of radical methods, recalling the progressive remarks about labor fairness she'd read in some of Henry's earlier letters. Surprised by the discrepancy, she probed. "Didn't you once write of supporting fair wages for ranch workers, no matter their background? You spoke of the West as a place for true equality." Henry's jaw worked for a moment. "Those were general statements," he said tersely, reflecting certain ideals. "Yes, but real life in this territory must balance principle with practicality. Mackenzie pushes too far too quickly. It disrupts the old families, the established order. We can't have that chaos if we want a stable future." "A stable future built on inequity?" Rosalie asked softly, though she heard her own voice begin to harden. "Surely we can strive for a more inclusive approach." His eyes narrowed, a sign of tension. "You speak with unusual conviction, Miss Bennett. And while I admire conviction, there's a line between well-reasoned discussion and a woman stepping beyond her place." Her heart lurched. The words "beyond her place" stung more than she'd expected. A flush spread across her cheeks, part indignation, part heartbreak at how distant he suddenly seemed from the man who'd penned those open-minded letters. Yet Rosalie refused to yield. "I apologize if my directness offends Mr. Carlyle, but you did express interest in my intellect. We corresponded about philosophical matters. This," she gestured to the tension between them, "this is the real me. I don't see how being forthright undermines anyone's stable future." Henry drew a long breath, his composure visibly fraying. "Miss Bennett, I sought a bride with an educated mind. Yes, but not one who challenges her betrothed at every turn. A woman's role ideally is to support her husband's endeavors, maintain social graces, and contribute through more gentle influences, not direct confrontation." The finality in his voice shook her. Rosalie realized with stark clarity that Henry's admiration for her intellect was contingent upon it, not threatening his stance or overshadowing him. She tried to remain calm. "If you wanted someone content with a supportive role, only perhaps you should have made that explicit in your advertisement. Your letters suggested you valued a partner, not an accessory." Henry's face went taut. "Partner or not, I can't proceed with a marriage overshadowed by discord. I cannot have you expressing these divisive views about labor or property to neighbors we rely on. It would jeopardize my reputation, possibly my standing." She lifted her chin, sadness warring with defiance. "Then we have a grave mismatch, Mr. Carlyle, because I cannot simply cease to hold opinions or remain silent when facing unjust circumstances." He rose abruptly, frustration coloring his features. "We will have to reconsider. For now, remain as my guest. I'll speak with you further after I handle some affairs in town." Without waiting for her response, he strode out the parlor door, leaving her alone among the carefully chosen furnishings, the expensive drapes, the quiet hush of a home designed to convey affluence and respectability. Rosalie sat numbly, heart pounding. She had gambled everything, her meager savings, her professional reputation on this arrangement, believing Henry Carlyle might embrace the outspoken teacher she was. Instead, he viewed her strong convictions as a liability. The hours stretched as she turned over scenarios in her mind. Could she truly rein in her convictions simply to secure marriage? Or might she find an alternative, even if it meant leaving Prairie Creek as swiftly as she had arrived? She was still in that chair, grappling with the question, when a knock sounded on the door. Mrs. Turner peeked in, wearing a concerned look. "Miss Bennett, are you all right?" Henry's gone off with a face like thunder, overheard raised voices earlier. Rosalie stood, exhaustion shadowing her eyes. "He wants me to change who I am. I can't." Mrs. Turner made a sympathetic sound, ushering Rosalie into the kitchen for a cup of tea in a calmer atmosphere. "I suspect you arrived here expecting one thing," housekeeper said gently, and found another. "But maybe this territory can still offer you something, if not the match you plan." Rosalie clung to that slender possibility. She recalled her dismissal from the Derby school there too. She'd been too outspoken, but she'd also been an effective teacher, beloved by many students. Perhaps despite Henry's rejection, she could find a role in Prairie Creek. The question was how to remain in a community likely to side with a leading figure like Henry Carlyle. Her tea grew cold as she weighed the potential paths forward. The day's events came to a head that very evening. Henry returned from town with a subdued expression requesting a moment of Rosalie's time in the parlor. Mrs. Turner discreetly vanished, leaving them alone amid the soft glow of oil lamps. Henry cleared his throat. "I've given it thought, Miss Bennet. I must be frank. I cannot proceed with the marriage. Your temperament, your readiness to argue these qualities while possibly commendable in another context will not suit the life I envision." Rosalie had already braced herself for this, yet hearing it out loud caused a twist of dread in her stomach. "I see. Then what do you propose?" His jaw clenched, as though he disliked having to articulate the next words. "I'll provide funds for you to return east. We'll tell the town it was a misunderstanding. No harm done." She inhaled slowly, a cold acceptance washing through her. "I sold nearly everything to finance my journey here. Where exactly am I to go if I return?" He looked uncomfortable. "Perhaps Denver or Cheyenne. Somewhere your forthright manner might be more acceptable. I'm prepared to give you enough to establish yourself while you seek other employment." Her pride flared at the notion of a payoff, but she recognized that practical survival might demand swallowing that indignation. She forced her voice into calm politeness. "I appreciate your sense of responsibility, Mr. Carlyle. Indeed, I have limited funds of my own, but rest assured I do not intend to be a burden." Henry's stiff posture eased fractionally. "I would have done things differently had I known." He trailed off, gaze sliding away from hers. Perhaps he realized how shallow his disclaimer sounded. "In any case, the stage leaves tomorrow morning. I can arrange a seat, or you may stay in Prairie Creek for a day or two if you need, but I see no beneficial outcome in prolonging this arrangement." Rosalie nodded, her throat tight. "I'll decide quickly," she said, adopting an air of resoluteness. The conversation ended with a curt exchange of goodnights. For a woman who had traveled thousands of miles, she was undone in a matter of days. Inside her guest room, her mind whirled with sorrow, relief, and uncertain defiance. She thought of the old headmaster at Derby School whose narrow teaching methods she had challenged. She had been thrown out for unladylike insubordination. And now, for the second time, her outspokenness had cost her stability, or so it seemed. Yet a spark of something akin to rebellion kindled in her. Was she truly doomed to scuttle away tail between her legs every time society disapproved of her convictions? She paced the room. On a small writing desk, she glimpsed a stack of blank paper Henry had left presumably for correspondence. She tugged out a sheet and penned quick notes to the few acquaintances she'd made in Prairie Creek, apologizing for the short notice of her departure, but as she wrote, the words felt hollow. Did she truly have to leave? Flashes of her conversation with Mrs. Turner flickered. Maybe this territory can still offer you something? She also recalled the existence of a school in Prairie Creek rumored to be struggling. What if she didn't vanish? Could she remain as a schoolteacher, assuming they'd have her, but would Henry oppose such a thing, given his influence? Rosalie pressed her lips together, staring at the half-finished notes. She realized she had options, few though they might be. She'd always cherished her teaching vocation. If the local school truly needed a teacher, perhaps she could apply. The bigger question was whether Henry would hamper her attempt and how the small community would treat a rejected bride. Leaning forward, she began a second set of notes. This time more purposeful, a draft letter to the Prairie Creek School Board requesting to know if there was an opening. If they said no, at least she'd tried. If they said yes, maybe she could stay on her own terms. She fell asleep late into the night, her mind churning with these restless possibilities. But the dawn brought an unexpected commotion outside her window. Rubbing bleary eyes, Rosalie parted the curtains to see a cluster of ranch hands gathered around a horse and rider who had galloped in from the open range. The man was speaking urgently, his voice carrying on the crisp morning air. Moments later, Henry Carlyle burst out of the main house, face grim, as he conferred with the rider. Bits of the conversation drifted her way: cattle, fever outbreak. Grant said, "Wow." Another name, Mackenzie. Tension hung in the air as though an emergency had arrived. Her curiosity piqued Rosalie, hurriedly dressed and slipped downstairs. She found Mrs. Turner in the hallway, also peering outside with a concern. "What's happening?" Rosalie asked. Mrs. Turner shook her head. "Sounds like a sickness among the cattle in the north pasture. A man from the neighboring ranch, the Mackenzie place, rode over to warn us. They say it's highly contagious, if not contained." Henry's none too pleased about a neighbor interfering. But an outbreak is an outbreak, Rosalie recalled from Henry's brief mention that James Mackenzie was his chief rival. Yet here Mackenzie was sending a warning to help the Carlisle herd. The hypocrisy baffled her, but she also recognized it as a sign that local hostilities might be more complex than pure rivalry. Feeling an unaccustomed rush of boldness, she stepped outside, searching for clarity. In the swirl of ranch hands scrambling to hitch wagons, gather supplies, and load barrels of some disinfectant solution, Henry spotted her brow furrowing, but walked over with purposeful strides. Miss Bennett, I'd intended to finalize our departure arrangements this morning, but as you see, there's an emergency. The cattle face a fever outbreak, apparently discovered by Mackenzie's men. I must ride to the north pasture at once. Rosalie lifted her chin. Go, of course, but do you need extra help? If animals are ill, do you require someone to treat them? Segregate them like quarantining in a classroom epidemic. To her surprise, Henry gave a short nod. We do. But your presence might not be best received by the men who aren't used to a lady telling them what to do. Daniel Mackenzie himself might also be out there. Tensions run high enough. His stance turned dismissive. Stay here or in town if you prefer. We'll sort out your future once this crisis is handled. He turned to stride off, leaving her in the yard with a swirl of dust as ranch hands mounted horses and rumbled away in wagons. Rosalie breathed in the tang of adrenaline-laced air. True, she had no direct experience with ranching, but she knew something about containing the spread of disease lessons from her time teaching biology basics. She wanted to help, but Henry's words stung. She watched them depart in a cloud of hoofbeats, thinking ironically that her outspoken mind had once again put her at odds. She was relegated to the sidelines, the surest sign of rejection beyond the personal realm. Though she wasn't sure how Rosalie vowed she would find a way to stand on her own, she had come too far to surrender to stifling limitations once again. The morning slipped into midday, the ranch strangely quiet with most of the workers gone to the north pasture. Rosalie found herself in an uneasy limbo, effectively dismissed as a bride, uncertain whether she'd remain in Prairie Creek or head elsewhere, and now left alone on a ranch overshadowed by a looming cattle disease. Venturing to the porch, she noticed a lone rider approaching from the open range. As he neared, she realized it was no Carlisle ranch hand. The man's horse, a lean roan, wore a different brand, and the rider himself, a tall figure with a rugged hat pulled low, didn't adopt the typical Carlisle posture. He dismounted, scanned the near-empty yard, then locked eyes on her. Slowly he raised his hat. Beg pardon, ma'am? Is Henry Carlisle about? His voice held a measured calm. In the golden midday sunlight, she observed he was perhaps mid-30s, with traces of stubble and keen gray eyes that suggested intelligence beneath the cowboy exterior. He rode out to handle the fever outbreak. Rosalie replied, I believe in the north pasture. The man nodded. Then I'll ride that way. Name's James Mackenzie. My ranch borders Carlisle's to the west. We discovered the sickness among our herd. First, I sent a man earlier to warn Henry. Figured I'd come personally to offer any help. So this was James Mackenzie, the troublemaker in Henry's, telling the progressive ranch owner, rumored to stir up local traditions. He glanced at Rosalie's attire, a practical day dress more suited to the east, then met her gaze with frank curiosity. You must be Miss Bennett from Boston, if I'm not mistaken. She blinked, surprised he knew her name. Yes, I am, though it seems my reason for being here has shifted. Mackenzie gave a small, wry smile. Word travels fast. I heard Mr. Carlisle's engagement might be. He hesitated on pause. Apologies if that's too direct. Town gossip is a force unto itself. Rosalie squared her shoulders. No need to apologize. It appears we are indeed not proceeding, but from what I gather, you're here to help. Not discuss that. He inclined his head. Correct, the outbreak is serious. If not contained, it'll affect the entire region's herds, not just Carlisle's or mine. Glancing around the deserted yard, he added, Odd to find you alone here, Miss Bennett. Are you all right? She hesitated. There was sincerity in his gaze, no condescension. It struck her how in so few words he'd shown more genuine concern than Henry had all day. I am as well as circumstances. Allow, she admitted softly. Thank you for asking. He nodded. I won't delay. The men are likely working the area near the creek. If you see Henry or any foreman return, would you please let them know? I'll coordinate from the ridgeline. Certainly, she said as he remounted. Before spurring his horse forward, Mackenzie paused, face thoughtful. Miss Bennett, Prairie Creek might still have use for your teaching. Don't let Carlisle's opinions define your future. Then he was gone in a swirl of dust, leaving her with that provocative statement. She wondered how he knew she was a teacher. More gossip, perhaps, or his own inquiries. Warmth spread through her chest at the reminder that she possessed a skill of genuine value. If Henry Carlisle no longer wanted her as a spouse, maybe the town did want her as an educator. On a whim, Rosalie walked the perimeter of the house, heading toward a small meadow she'd seen from a distance earlier. The high grasses swayed in a gentle breeze. Beyond them, she glimpsed a stable that might belong to the ranch's caretaker. She recalled Henry had told her not to wander far, but she needed clarity. Out there where the wind ran free, maybe her mind could settle, skirting the barn. She came upon a peculiar sight, a young girl, perhaps 10 years old, craning her neck up at a tree, a calico cat perched on a branch, meowing pitifully. The girl paced anxiously, whispering, "Don't jump. Clover, you'll get hurt." Recognizing distress, Rosalie's protective instincts sparked. She approached, speaking gently. The girl nearly jumped when she noticed Rosalie. "Are you from the main house?" the child asked, eyes wide. Clover got herself stuck again. Rosalie looked up at the branch, only about 6 feet high, but out of the child's reach. Without hesitation, Rosalie slid off her shawl, tossed it aside, and stepped onto a stable crate. Carefully, she lifted herself onto a low branch, ignoring the tug of her skirts. The cat flattened its ears, but didn't flee. A minute later, Rosalie had coaxed Clover into her arms. Gingerly, she climbed back down. The girl beamed. "Thank you, ma'am. Pa's away with the others, so I was on my own. Clover's my best friend since Mama passed last year." Rosalie smiled, handing the cat over. "I'm glad we could spare you that worry. What's your name?" "Harriet Carter," the girl replied, cradling the cat. "And you must be Henry Carlisle's betrothed." "That was the plan," Rosalie said softly. "But things have changed. I'm Rosalie Bennett. Pleased to meet you." Harriet patted Clover's head. "You're nice. I hope you stay. Not many ladies come to these parts who help like that." Then the girl scampered off toward a small cabin beyond the meadow, cat in tow, leaving Rosalie oddly heartened. As she dusted off her dress, the clang of distant cowbells and the murmur of men's voices reached her ears. She realized the ranch hands were returning from the north pasture. Possibly Henry, too. Bracing herself, she returned to the main yard, determined to at least attempt another conversation with Henry. Despite everything she wanted him to see, she wasn't there to sabotage his ranch or overshadow him. She simply refused to be muzzled. If that was irreconcilable, then so be it. Henry did not in fact return until late afternoon, and when he did, he bore a thunderous expression. Rosalie, awaiting him on the porch, knew instantly the day's negotiations with Mackenzie must have gone poorly, or that the cattle crisis was worse than expected. She watched him tie his horse to the rail, dismount with sharp movements, and stride up the porch steps. "Miss Bennett," he said curtly, barely acknowledging Mrs. Turner, who stood behind Rosalie. "We must finalize your departure." Rosalie inhaled, scanning his features for any hint of second-guessing. She found none. "If that is truly your wish?" He nodded. "I rode into town earlier, arranged for your seat on tomorrow's eastbound stage. I secured a letter of introduction to a friend in Denver who might have a place for you if you remain there." Her heart sank, though she maintained composure. "Thank you. That's thorough." He cleared his throat, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "This situation with Mackenzie's warning has proven him meddlesome as ever. My herd is at risk. I can't risk another crisis. Let's part amicably." Then, as though recollecting her effort with Harriet Carter, he added more quietly, "I do hope you find a suitable place to continue your teaching. You're evidently good with children, but it won't be here for reasons I believe we both understand." A swirl of conflicting emotions rose in Rosalie's chest: anger at his dismissal, sadness for the dream that had died so quickly, and a glimmer of relief that she needn't continue forcing herself into an ill-fitting role. She nodded, exhaling shakily. "I understand. I'll gather my things." Henry's posture relaxed fractionally, as though her acquiescence was a relief. "I'll have a wagon take you to the depot early. We need not prolong this." "Yes," she replied. The finality in that single syllable resonated. She realized with a pang that she'd had no chance to explore the possibility of teaching in Prairie Creek. Not if Henry objected, but maybe that door wasn't fully shut. She recalled Harriet's earnest gaze, the cat rescue, the hint of possibility. But faced with Henry's determined stance, she felt powerless. Rosalie spent the evening in quiet reflection, packing her trunks once again. The notion of traveling to Denver weighed heavily. She had enough money to survive a few months. She might find a teaching job or do menial work. Meanwhile, Prairie Creek's small school might be floundering for an educator. She gazed at her reflection in the bedroom mirror, murmuring, "Are you so proud that you'd flee rather than fight for what you want?" A knock at the door startled her. Mrs. Turner entered timidly. Beg pardon, Miss Bennett, but you have a visitor in the parlor? One of the ranch hands said it's from next door, the Mackenzie place. Curiosity piqued. Rosalie followed Mrs. Turner downstairs. There near the parlor fireplace stood James Mackenzie himself. The faint lamplight revealed the same tall figure, gray eyes that radiated a quiet confidence and a dusting of beard. He inclined his head politely as she approached. Mr. Mackenzie, she greeted, is there a problem with the cattle? He shook his head. They're managing the outbreak. I came for a different reason. Word around Prairie Creek is you're leaving tomorrow. Rosalie stiffened slightly. Yes, that's Henry's arrangement. A flicker of sympathy passed across James's expression. So the rumors are true, you're no longer? He hesitated, choosing words carefully. Engaged. She pressed her lips together. We discovered irreconcilable differences in outlook. James nodded as though he guessed that much. It's a shame for the town. We heard from Harriet Carter that you rescued her cat, and she said you'd taught her a little reading, even in that brief encounter. Prairie Creek needs a teacher. He paused, a trace of earnestness in his voice. I serve on the school board, Miss Bennett. We've lacked a permanent teacher for months, and it's hurting the children's development. I'd like to discuss a possibility. Her heart thumped. She had scarcely dared to hope. A teaching position. But Henry Carlisle, he wields considerable influence. He might? James waved off the concern. Yes, Henry's powerful, but we're still a board, and the community at large has opinions. If you're truly a qualified educator, many parents would listen. This territory is short on good teachers. We can't afford to lose you just because of a personal matter with Carlisle. Could it be so simple? She felt excitement battling her sense of caution. I hold a teaching certificate from Massachusetts. I taught for 3 years at the Derby School for Girls. Albeit leaving under tense circumstances, I might be able to pass references along if needed. James's features lit with interest. If you were willing, perhaps you'd come to the next board meeting. You can present your credentials. The board includes me, the mayor, and 3 others. We can put it to a vote. He paused, reading the swirl of emotion on her face. Of course, if you prefer Denver, that's your choice. But Prairie Creek would be fortunate to have you if you can stand the challenges. A spark of hope flared in Rosalie's chest. She cast a glance around the parlor, the well-appointed ranch house that was not to be her home. The final decision that Henry had made without her, this invitation from Mackenzie felt like a lifeline. I want to consider it. Is there time to speak with the board before the stage leaves tomorrow? James pressed his lips together. The board's next official meeting is in 2 days, but we can try an informal approach. If you'd like to stall your departure, we might arrange something quickly, or you can postpone the stage for a short while. I suspect the stage master would allow it if you pay a small fee. She exhaled, weighing the uncertain path of defying Henry's plan. But then she imagined Harriet Carter's hopeful face and recalled Harriet's comment, "Not many ladies help like that, I hope you stay." Replacing a child's wide-eyed admiration with a lonely existence in Denver seemed a travesty. A noise in the hallway signaled Henry's approach. James' tensed eyes flicking that way. Softly, he said, "If you're interested, come to the Prairie Creek School Board meeting tomorrow morning at 8. We might not have an official vote, but we can show the town you're a viable candidate. No matter Carlisle's stance." She barely had time to nod before Henry stepped into the parlor. A scowl marring his features. "Mackenzie, this is quite an unexpected call." James faced Henry without flinching. "I came to deliver an updated plan for containing the cattle fever. Also, I wanted to speak to Miss Bennett about a matter." He gestured calmly with the rolled parchment in hand. "But I'll go now." Henry's glare spoke volumes. "Yes, see to it. Miss Bennett has packing to finish." James departed with a respectful tip of his hat to Rosalie, and then Henry turned on her, displeasure radiating. "I find you conversing with Mackenzie in my own home." Rosalie braced herself, heart pounding. "He came to me with a professional inquiry about the school. Nothing more, you and I. Mr. Carlisle have ended our personal arrangement, so I owe you no explanation regarding visitors." His jaw tightened. "I offered you courtesy funds, a chance to leave with dignity. Now you risk stirring up conflict by listening to Mackenzie's talk. That man will use you to antagonize me, you realize." She squared her shoulders. "Perhaps he values me as a teacher, not as a pawn. If the Prairie Creek School truly needs an educator, my qualifications speak for themselves." A moment of silence stretched thick with unspoken resentments. Henry inhaled sharply. eyes reflecting both frustration and something like regret. Do what you will, Miss Bennett, but don't be surprised if the board he's part of refuses you anyway. Many owe loyalty to me, hold conservative views. A pause. Tomorrow's stage is ready at 9. If you remain in Prairie Creek, do so at your own risk. He left her there, the final words echoing in her mind, at your own risk. She pressed her lips together. This was the West, a place of wide horizons and possibilities, but also rigid conventions. With a final glance at the door James had exited, she resolved to face the school board. If they rejected her on Henry's say-so, so be it. But if there was even a chance to remain as an independent teacher, she would fight for it. Sleep came fitfully that night, dominated by dreams of idle children yearning for a proper classroom and of a horse-drawn stage rattling off without her. By dawn, she rose dressed in her best dark green traveling dress, once more ironically, and carried her trunk downstairs. She would go to the board meeting at 8, then decide either board the stage at 9 or remain in Prairie Creek with uncertain prospects. The sun had scarcely broken over the ridges when Rosalie settled into a ranch wagon with a taciturn stable hand tasked with driving her to town. Henry was nowhere to be seen, perhaps already off dealing with cattle issues or pointedly avoiding her farewell. She felt no sadness at his absence, only the faint bitterness of how illusions can so swiftly crumble. Prairie Creek's town hall was a modest structure perched atop the local mercantile. A narrow staircase led to a wide meeting room flanked by plain wooden chairs. According to James Mackenzie's directions, the school board would gather here at 8 to address urgent educational matters. Rosalie arrived promptly, heart-drumming, carrying a valise with her teaching certificates and letters of recommendation from her Boston colleagues, hoping they'd overshadow the unpleasantness of her forced departure from Derby School. A few townspeople had already gathered in the hallway, mostly mothers concerned about the lack of stable instruction. She caught wind of their conversations. My boy can barely read more than a few letters. We can't go another term without a teacher. My daughter's arithmetic is falling behind. She's bright, but there's no one to guide her. Rosalie's determination flared. She quietly introduced herself, gleaning details of the children's ages and skills. Their eagerness warmed her heart, affirming she might truly serve a need here. At precisely 8, Mayor Eustace Phillips, a portly man with a whiskered face, opened the door to the boardroom, calling everyone inside. The board consisted of 5 members. The mayor, a retired merchant named Mr. Foster, a middle-aged blacksmith's wife named Mrs. Henderson, a rancher from the northern outskirts, and James Mackenzie. Rosalie's eyes darted to James, who tipped his hat with a supportive nod. Henry Carlisle was conspicuously absent, a relief or maybe a looming threat. She wasn't sure. Mayor Phillips cleared his throat once they'd settled on simple wooden benches. First item, the continuing vacancy for a full-time teacher. We received no positive responses from Cheyenne or Denver after the last advertisement. It appears we risk another term of half measures. Miss Lily Underwood, who offered temporary lessons, is moving away this month. Something must be done, murmurs spread. A hush fell as Rosalie rose, heart-pounding, to address them. Pardon me, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to put my name forward for the position. My name is Rosalie Bennett. Silence, then a ripple of whispers. The blacksmith's wife leaned toward the mayor, whispering. Others stared openly at the woman known to be Henry Carlisle's short-lived fiancée. Finally, James Mackenzie spoke, voice steady and clear. Miss Bennett holds a Massachusetts teaching certificate and taught at a prominent Boston girls' school for 3 years. She has the credentials we need. The mayor shifted in his seat, shooting James a wary look. Yes, we have. Heard rumor of that. Then turning to Rosalie, Miss Bennett, while your qualifications may be suitable, I must note that community standards in Prairie Creek are traditional. She inhaled evenly, recalling the ultimatum from Henry and the social norms that hounded her. I respect that. However, I fail to see how my personal arrangements hinder my capacity to teach. I am prepared to abide by local decorum, residing in a reputable boarding house, respecting the moral guidelines. If there are concerns about propriety, I can assure you my focus is on the children's education, not on stirring up scandal. Hush. Mrs. Henderson, the lone female board member, gave a small nod, as if encouraging. Then another board member, the rancher from the north, said gruffly, We appreciate your stance, Miss Bennett. The question is, can Prairie Creek accept an unmarried woman of outspoken nature in a long-term teaching role? Some folks believe we should hold to older ways, a teacher who's docile and well under a husband's authority. Rosalie stiffened, but she forced her voice calm. My success as a teacher doesn't require docility. It requires knowledge, dedication, and the ability to guide students effectively. My time in Boston demonstrates that I manage a classroom well. I'd be happy to submit letters attesting to my skill. She retrieved her papers from the valise, stepping forward to hand them to the mayor. He accepted them with visible reluctance, as if bracing for a confrontation. One of the townspeople in the back, a mother of three, stood to speak. We're desperate for a proper teacher. My eldest is nearly 12 and she's behind in reading. My youngest is 6, never had more than a few months of lessons. I, for one, care more about whether Miss Bennett can help them read well, count properly, and learn geography, than about whether she's too bold. Several heads nodded in agreement. Rosalie glanced at James, who offered an encouraging half-smile. The tension thickened as the mayor exchanged murmured words with the other board members. Then he faced the room again. It's the board's unanimous stance that we value an educator who can serve the children. However, the mayor paused, glancing at Mr. Foster, who shot him a pointed look. Some among the community questioned Miss Bennett's circumstances given her recent arrival as Mr. Carlyle's intended bride. We must ensure no future scandal. Miss Bennett, are you prepared to comply with any guidelines the board sees fit to enforce regarding your lodgings and conduct? The old frustration rose in Rosalie's throat. She must not sabotage this chance. So she nodded slowly, adding, I will do whatever ensures the children have stable education within reason. James Mackenzie cleared his throat, stepping in. Let's define within reason. We're not here to muzzle a teacher's personal viewpoints or force her into marriage if it's not her choice. The pointed remark hung in the air, clearly referencing Henry's rumored ultimatum. Another ripple of murmurs spread. The board would have to weigh whether Mackenzie's viewpoint carried enough weight to overrule the conservative majority. Mayor Phillips eventually sighed. We propose a provisional arrangement, Miss Bennett. You begin teaching next Monday. We'll ask you to live at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. She's a widow of good standing. If by the end of one school term we find no issues with your conduct or teaching, you may continue indefinitely. Does that seem acceptable? Rosalie swallowed, scanning the gathered faces for any sign of sabotage. No sign of Henry Carlyle, which might be helpful or harmful. Yes, she said, deciding swiftly. I accept on that basis. A collective exhale seemed to sweep the room. Some parents grinned, nodding at each other. Mrs. Henderson gave a quiet clap of approval. James Mackenzie's eyes shone with relief. The mayor hammered his gavel lightly. Very well. Provisional teacher's appointment is granted. We'll finalize salary and terms after this session. Congratulations, Miss Bennett. Heart thudding, Rosalie realized she'd secured a teaching post in Prairie Creek, an outcome that defied Henry Carlyle's scripted departure plan. She returned to her seat, relief and caution mingling. The rest of the board meeting blurred past her in a rush of minor town matters. But she couldn't forget. Henry still held considerable sway in Prairie Creek. If he disapproved, conflict might loom. Yet in that moment, all she felt was a stirring of pride that she had at last stood on her own terms and found acceptance from a community that needed her. When the meeting adjourned, parents and neighbors swarmed around with congratulations. James Mackenzie managed to reach her side quietly, pressing her hand in a moment of shared victory. You did it, he murmured, grin breaking across his face. And for the first time in a long while, Rosalie believed this new path, teaching here in Prairie Creek, forging alliances with the open-minded, charting a future not defined by someone else's ideals, was more than just a consolation prize. It was the life she had long deserved. Rosalie left the town hall with a swirl of exhilaration coursing through her veins. A mere day ago, Henry Carlyle had neatly orchestrated her exit from Prairie Creek. Now she was the town's provisional teacher with the support of parents, James Mackenzie and several board members. She recognized it wouldn't be all smooth sailing. Henry's influence remained a factor, and the arrangement was still labeled provisional. But it was a monumental shift from scurrying back east in defeat. Outside, the crisp autumn air felt sharper as she approached the stage depot. She spotted her trunks, which Henry had arranged to be readied for the morning stage. A pang of irony struck her. Only hours earlier, she'd intended to climb aboard that stage to Denver. Now she had to finalize the new plan. Cancel that seat, store her belongings, and relocate to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. She paid the cancellation fee with some of the money Henry had given her, ironically using his funds to remain in the town he'd wanted her to leave. A swirl of rumor preceded her steps wherever she walked that day. Townspeople recognized her from the board meeting. Some greeted her warmly, parents especially. Others looked uncertain, likely aware of her broken engagement to the powerful rancher. Yet no one openly confronted her. She found small pockets of supportive kindness in shopkeepers, offering her best wishes for her new teaching post. By midday, she'd retrieved her trunks and brought them to Mrs. Henderson's place. A pleasant two-story home with a tidy yard. The widowed landlady, a cheerful woman in her late 50s, fussed over the new boarder with genuine enthusiasm. "You'll have the upstairs front room, Miss Bennett," Mrs. Henderson chirped, guiding Rosalie through a cozy hallway. "And you needn't worry. My reputation is solid as stone. Nobody can say a whisper against you living under my roof. I'm thrilled the children will finally get real schooling again." Settling into the sunny room, Rosalie felt relief wash over her. It was simpler than the large guest quarters at Carlisle Ranch, but she already preferred it. It was wholly her own, safe from the weight of Henry's disapproval. She arranged her few possessions, feeling a sense of new beginning. A desk near the window offered a view of Prairie Creek's main street. From that vantage, she could watch the daily comings and goings while preparing lessons. Late that afternoon, she ventured to the modest schoolhouse on the eastern edge of town. It was a small structure with chipped white paint flanked by a single towering cottonwood tree. She found the door unlocked, presumably left accessible for repairs or cleaning. Inside, desks and chairs lay scattered from the last teacher's abrupt departure. Dust coated the blackboard. She ran a finger along the windowsill, leaving a clean streak behind. It needed tidying, the new supplies, and a thorough scrubbing. But to her eyes, it glimmered with possibility, a blank slate to shape with her progressive teaching style. A noise behind her made her start. James Mackenzie stepped through the doorway, doffing his hat. "I suspected you'd come, check the schoolhouse. Mind if I see it too?" She shook her head, grateful for his presence. They surveyed the single classroom, side by side, discussing which repairs might be necessary first. He pointed out that the stove used for heating in colder months might need a new flue, and offered to gather help from local carpenters to fix the warped floorboards. As they chatted, their conversation took an unguarded turn. James asked about her departure from Boston's Derby School, and for the first time she confided the real reason: her conflict with the old-fashioned headmaster who refused modern curricula. She admitted she'd been labeled too outspoken, culminating in an ultimatum she couldn't accept. James listened, face intent, not a trace of judgment. "I see," he said quietly. "So you left with convictions intact rather than acquiesce to something you found wrong." She nodded, swallowing the tightness in her throat. "It cost me my livelihood then, I thought. In Henry Carlisle, I'd found a man who wanted that same forthrightness. I was wrong." James's gaze held empathy. "The West changes folks. Some adapt, some cling to old ways." He paused. "You'll do more than adapt. I suspect you'll help shape Prairie Creek for the better." Warmth blossomed in her chest at that quiet affirmation. The battered desk's dusty corners and scuffed floor seemed to fade as she recognized an ally who valued her voice. Maybe too outspoken in Boston, or Carlisle's ranch was exactly what Prairie Creek's children needed. A teacher unafraid to challenge norms for the sake of genuine growth. They parted near dusk, James heading back to his ranch, Rosalie to her new lodgings. She lingered for a moment by the schoolhouse door, casting her gaze over the property line. In the distance, she vaguely discerned the boundary to Henry's land. She wondered how he'd react when he found out she wasn't departing after all. A hint of unease gnawed at her, but she braced herself. She had chosen a path that no longer fell under Carlisle's control, that in and of itself felt like a declaration of her independence, one she refused to regret. In the weeks that followed, Rosalie Bennett settled into Prairie Creek life as though born to it. The battered schoolhouse became her domain, from dawn until afternoon's close. She scoured the blackboard, scrubbed floors, rearranged desks into more engaging clusters, introduced reading circles, and pinned new charts illustrating geography, arithmetic, tables, and basic science. Her approach was unorthodox by local standards, focusing on active participation rather than rote memorization. But the children responded enthusiastically, and parents marveled at the transformation. Outside of class, she lodged comfortably under Mrs. Henderson's roof, garnering respectability that shielded her from most gossip. Henry Carlisle maintained a distant courtesy, funneling resources to the school in the form of a modest donation for supplies, evidently wishing to preserve a veneer of community-mindedness. He rarely confronted Rosalie directly, and she hardly saw him except at the weekly church service or occasional town events. They exchanged polite nods, but no more. In a sense, it was a relief not to endure awkward personal tension. Yet a part of her recognized that Henry's acceptance was never truly necessary for her success now. She had proven she could stand on her own. James Mackenzie became a frequent visitor to the schoolhouse, sometimes bringing new books or offering help with repairs. More often, he simply observed her lessons, quietly admiring how she guided lively discussions. In those moments, their gazes would meet a silent acknowledgement that they shared more than civic goals. Indeed, an undercurrent of affection pulsed between them, though neither had spoken explicitly of romance. Both recognized the fragile space they inhabited. Rosalie fresh from a broken engagement, James wary of overshadowing her new position. They let their bond grow slowly rooted in mutual respect. During the winter break, townsfolk organized a holiday pageant in the church hall, and Rosalie's students performed a choral reading impressing the crowd with their newfound confidence. By then, Rosalie had officially secured the school board's final vote of approval. Even the more conservative members had to concede her success was undeniable. She was no longer provisional. She was Prairie Creek's school teacher in her own right. The applause that night was as much for her as it was for the children. And so by the time the first bright buds of spring surfaced in that wide Wyoming land, Rosalie's standing in the community felt deeply established. She had not compromised her values nor subdued her outspoken nature. She had instead found a place that could appreciate them in some measure, and with each lesson taught, each child who learned to read or multiply, she solidified her role. At the same time, her friendship with James Mackenzie blossomed into something quietly profound. He continued to champion her presence, challenging any residual wariness from more traditional ranchers. With each conversation about new teaching methods, his innovative ranch techniques, or the potential for new social reforms, Rosalie sensed they were kindred spirits forging a future in a changing West. One late spring afternoon after a normal day's lessons, Rosalie stepped outside the schoolhouse to find James waiting by a wagon filled with wildflowers. He extended a bouquet of purple lupine and yellow daisy-like blossoms, cheeks reddening slightly beneath his easygoing grin. "Something for the teacher who brightens. Prairie Creek," he said softly, and she accepted the flowers with shining eyes. Their closeness no longer a rumor, it had become a cherished reality. She reflected on the winding path that led her here from Boston's strict academic halls to an ill-fated engagement in a place she hadn't even heard of before, to forging her own destiny with an open-minded rancher. Yet in that breath of wind stirring her hair, she felt not regret for the rejection she'd endured, but gratitude, the very trait that had cost her so dearly. Her forthright, outspoken mind was what Wyoming cherished. A land of possibilities demanded the unstoppable will of those unafraid to speak up for progress. And in James Mackenzie, she'd found not a caretaker or a judge, but an equal who reveled in her outspokenness. She smiled, recalling that initial heartbreak with Henry Carlisle. Let him keep his rigid view of a wife's place. She had discovered something far more precious, a life built on authenticity, a community that needed her, and a future bright as the western sky. If some called her too outspoken, she would wear the label proudly, for it was precisely that strength that had earned her a rightful position and the abiding affection of a man who respected her mind as dearly as her heart. Standing on the schoolhouse porch, Rosalie gazes out at the wide Wyoming horizon. She remembers the day she was labeled too outspoken back in Boston and how that judgment nearly drove her to abandon her calling. Yet here in Prairie Creek, every challenge has illuminated her true worth, no longer a mere bride-to-be, but a trusted teacher shaping young minds with Mackenzie's friendship and the townspeople's growing acceptance. Rosalie sees that her bold convictions fit perfectly in a land of pioneering spirits and untamed possibilities. She embraces the future with quiet confidence, grateful for each obstacle that revealed her resilience. By facing rejection head-on, she discovered a place that welcomes her forthright nature and a community that thrives on her fresh perspective. Now she invites you to share your thoughts. Have you ever felt too outspoken for your surroundings? Let us know in the comments and spark a discussion. And if this story resonates, please subscribe to our channel for more tales of courage and hope. Your voice matters just like Rosalie's.